healing and moving forward together. This is absolutely beautiful, looking out into this audience and seeing all the different people and individuals who make up this amazing community, and recognizing that we're here for a common purpose, and that is to heal and move forward together. Reflecting back and remembering what we have to look forward to, and not allowing it just to be today, but to be every day. And it's beautiful to see so many faces familiar, and those who I know I have a heart that you share, because otherwise you wouldn't be here. So we have to recognize that of one another and celebrate that. And with that, because we had some history facts, Miss Atrula Moore, Miss June White Mansfield, Miss Opaline Davis, and Mr. Frank Davis were very instrumental in contributing some historical facts. And out of honor for those from the past and also those for the present, I'd like to read some of those. And I'm going to tell you, as it was told to me, this is just a small piece of the local Black history. The first recognized African-American local community leader, and this was initially found in the United States Department of the Interior, and also contributions from the local historians. The late Edmund F. Scott was a Black entrepreneur who moved to Clifton Forge in 1881. Mr. Scott was also the first locally recognized African-American leader to serve as a bridge between the Black and white communities in 1881. He was also a successful businessman who donated land and materials, as well as helped to raise the funds needed to build First Baptist Church. He invested in real estate, opened and livery stable, a coal yard, a brick yard on land which is now Linden Park, a store on Jackson Street, and a saloon. What is now Forest Hills was a productive fruit orchard owned by Mr. Scott. The first African-American local political leaders and community business leaders. Carolyn Barnett is the first African-American to serve on the Board of Supervisors. The late Robert G. Davis Jr. was the first African-American vice mayor of Clifton Forge. The late George Good Sr. was the first African-American mayor of Clifton Forge. Pamela Marshall is the first African-American female council member, vice mayor, and mayor. Other African-American council members to serve include Mr. Edward Mansfield, the late Mr. Meredith Mills, and Mr. Robert Johnson Jr. Ione Callender is the first African-American to serve as the chair of the board of the Allegheny Highlands Chamber of Commerce. Ingrid Barber is the first African-American female executive director of the Allegheny Highlands Community Service. And the late Robert G. Davis Jr., the late F.M. Clark Jr., Irvin H. Moore Jr., the late Carl Mack, and Cornelius Ray were some of the leaders for the local John W. Barnes Masonic Lodge number 305. Select education history. The Jefferson School provided primary and secondary school education for African Americans attending school in the Clifton Forge community from 1919 to 1965, starting at a small school on Verge Street, and then it was moved to a structure on Church Street that eventually became the home of Dr. Gibbs. The final location was on Church and A Street and was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2010. The late Gretel Anderson, the late Lillian Watkins, and the late Lois Morris, the late Lois Mansfield, the late Pamela Turner, and the late Evelyn Nelson served as teachers for the integrated Clifton Forge schools. The late Reverend Matthew Barnett served as a member of the Clifton Forge School Board. Ione Callender served as a member of the Allegheny Highlands School Board. Doreen Davis and Dorothy Leisure assisted many high school students with attending college through the DSLCC Talent Search and TAP programs. Atrula Clark Moore was the first educator to be inducted in the local chapter of Delta Kappa Gamma International Honor Society. The late Reverend J.B. Williams served on the Clifton Forge School Board. The late Bosco Williams Sr. served as the first African-American administrator, principal/director for the Jackson River Technical Center, and as an attendance supervisor for the Allegheny Public Schools. Teresa Johnson served as the first African-American female principal for the integrated local elementary and middle schools. And Dwayne Ross served as the first African-American principal for Allegheny High School. Select church history. First Baptist Church is the oldest African-American church, founded in 1878 in Clifton Forge. Main Street Baptist Church is the second oldest African-American church, founded in 1895 in Clifton Forge. Reverend Dr. Rosalind Thomas was the first African-American female ordained at First Baptist Church. She was also the first African-American president of the Eastern Allegheny Ministerial Association. Select science history. Local African-American medical doctors include Dr. Spelman Gibbs and Dr. Edward Connor. The late Dr. Albert Poindexter was a Jefferson School graduate and scientist who contributed to the development of the atomic bomb. The late Dr. Arliner Young was the first African-American woman to earn a doctorate in zoology. The late Irene Williams was the first African-American female cardiac rehabilitation nurse at the Allegheny Regional Hospital, which is now Lewis Gale Allegheny Regional Hospital. Select art history. Frank Davis is a professional photographer, among other things, as you've heard, who has captured photos of presidents, governors, entertainers, athletes, and other special moments throughout his career. Bishop Alfred Mustard Daring Sr. is the first radio personality to be inducted into the Virginia Opry. Felicia D. Anderson served as a director of the College Theater Guild at Virginia State College for many years. She received recognition as one of the best directors in collegiate circles. She also served as the director of the local Allegheny Players Drama Club. The late Big Jack Mansfield was an accomplished and gifted pianist and organist. He would return home from Washington, D.C. to give yearly concerts. The late George Washington Baby Scott was a black folk artist from the early 1900s. Using a penknife, he carved all kinds of animals in wood, limestone, shell, and soapstone. His work is exhibited and scattered among private collectors. The late Nathaniel Humbug Washington was a local photographer who captured memories during Jefferson School events and activities. Select community history and resources. Almost done. The late Reverend Hugo Austin, former pastor of the First Baptist Church, delivered the dedicatory address at the opening of Green Pasture Recreation Area in 1940. His picture is now on the kiosk as you enter Green Pasture's recreation area. A 2011 manuscript entitled The Allegheny Highlands African American Oral History and Preservation Project is preserved at the Dabney Lancaster Community College Library. What's Your Story books are stories from local citizens who tell their story about their experience growing up. These books are located at the Allegheny Highlands Arts and Crafts Center and can be purchased there. I would also like to encourage you, if you have not gone to the Allegheny Highlands Arts and Crafts Center, to go check out the African American art exhibit. They're very excited to have local artwork from around the surrounding area. So please go and check out that and maybe even purchase some of these books. And then lastly, select Black business history. The late Emma Branch owned a local restaurant known as Elite Cafe and affectionately known as Miss Emma's. The late Bill Brown owned a local car garage. The late Fred M. Clark Jr. owned a local TV and radio service. He also sold records. The late Eric Fox owned a store on Verge Street. The late Robert G. Davis Jr. and the late Walter Houston were the owners of the D&H store. The late Caroline Drew owned a local inn. The late Arthur Smith was the owner of a local dry cleaning service. Audrey Walker would later operate the cleaners afterwards. The late Chester A. Smith was the first African-American owner of a funeral home, a taxi cab service, and real estate company. He also owned a local grocery store. The late Sweetie Hatcher Smith owned a local restaurant known as the Palace Tea Room and was affectionately known as Miss Sweeties. The late Floyd Sorrells, the late Herman Megason, the late William Cashwell, the late Silas Claiborne, and the late Bob Gray were some of the barbers who owned local African-American barbershops. The late Pauline Carter White and the late Willie Rice owned a local restaurant known as the White Grill and Bar. And the late Kenny Peters owned a local store on Verge Street. So as you can see, a very small piece, but very rich local Black history for Clifton Forge. And there's a lot more for the surrounding area, but I just wanted to acknowledge that history as part of this Juneteenth celebration. Thank you so much for coming out for this opening celebration. I hope you'll join us, because the fun is not over, at Washington Park There will be free barbecue. There's also bouncy houses for the children, games for adults and children, and a special thank you to the town of Clifton Forge, the town manager, Chucky Unruh, to Mott Alter Halt, who worked very closely along with Susan Hutchinson and the Main Street group. And then again, the local historians who contributed significantly to this effort, and all of you for being here. Without you, this event is not possible, and I hope that this is not the last one. I hope that this is the beginning of something very special that we can celebrate. And also, let me not forget, Pamela Marshall, if it were not for you, we would not have this holiday to celebrate, so I want to thank you for that. And so I look forward to seeing everybody at Washington Park. And again, thank you so much. It was a great, great choir. Everybody, thank you so much for everything you've done.